Time seemed to stand still in our house on Chestnut Street. 42 years Iris and I had lived in that small two-story house, where every creaky floorboard and every crack in the ceiling had a story to tell. Now, sitting in the empty living room, I can almost hear her coming down the stairs, rustling her favorite blue robe. My name is Ezra Hollis, 67 years old, former physics teacher at Coralville High School. All my life I've explained Newton's laws and the theory of relativity to teenagers, and now I realize that some human actions can't be explained by any physical laws. Iris taught English literature at the same school. We met in the teacher's lounge when I accidentally spilled coffee on her copy of Wuthering Heights. She didn't get angry, just looked up with her amazing gray eyes and said, "Now this book will smell like coffee instead of the dampness of the English moors." 2 months later we were married. Our life was simple and predictable, like physics problems from an old Soviet textbook. Breakfast at 7 in the morning, work until 3, then checking notebooks, dinner, sometimes a walk to the lake and back. Weekends, gardening for Iris and fishing for me. We didn't travel to exotic countries or collect art. Our savings were used to pay the mortgage, maintain the house, and educate our daughter. Raven was born when Iris was 32 and I was 35. A late baby we waited almost 10 years to have. Maybe that's why we spoiled her too much. Or maybe it was because she inherited her beauty from Iris and her stubbornness from me, but our daughter's character was complicated. Even in high school, Raven began to feel ashamed of us. She was embarrassed that her parents were just teachers at the same school she attended, that we drove an old Volvo and not a brand new Lexus like her friend Tiffany's parents, that our house isn't in an upscale Coralville neighborhood, but next to an industrial zone. "Why can't we go to the Bahamas for spring break?" she asked, stomping her foot. "Because we need to put money aside for your college," Iris answered calmly. I, on the other hand, was usually silent, suppressing the urge to lecture her on the value of education and the benefits of self-restraint. College hadn't changed Raven. She chose business school over the humanities, which Iris loved, or the exact sciences, which she had a talent for, judging by her grades in physics and math. "I want to make real money, Daddy, not scrap paper for pennies like you and Mom," she told me the night before she left. In her sophomore year, she met Nat Prescott. Tall, with a perfect smile and ambition the size of a skyscraper, he was studying finance and dreamed of Wall Street. Iris didn't like him from the first time she met him. "There's something fake about him, Ezra, like those new plastic windows they put in at school. They look shiny but feel cold," she told me after the dinner where Raven had introduced us to her boyfriend. I brushed off her words. The young man seemed ambitious, but was that a bad thing? Besides, he clearly adored our daughter. At least that's what I thought at the time. They got married right out of college. The lavish wedding, organized mostly with Nat's parents' money, looked like a picture from a glossy magazine. Raven shone in a dress that cost more than 3 of my monthly paychecks. Iris wore her only good dress, a navy blue one bought for our 25th anniversary. I saw some of the guests on Nat's mother's side of the family exchange glances as they assessed our modest outfits. After the wedding, Raven and Nat moved to Chicago. He took a job with an investment company, she with an insurance firm. Their visits to Coralville became less and less frequent, once a year for Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving, unless they had more interesting plans. Phone calls became rare, too. Raven always talked about her busyness, important projects, and meetings. Iris never complained, but I could see the sadness in her eyes when she looked at the picture of little Raven on the mantelpiece. Our lives continued to flow in a measured fashion until one fall day when Iris complained of a stomachache. At first we thought it was indigestion from my experimental stew, but the pain didn't go away for a week, 2 weeks, a month. Finally, I insisted on a full examination. The diagnosis sounded like a verdict: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Metastases had already spread to the liver and lymph nodes. The doctor said something about treatment options, but his eyes had already given us the verdict. I called Raven right after the appointment. She listened in silence, then said she'd come over the weekend. She arrived 2 weeks later, stayed a day, talking to clients on the phone the entire time, and left, promising to stay in touch. The next 6 months turned into an endless series of hospital rooms, IVs, painkillers, and quiet nights as I sat next to Iris's bed holding her hand. She was melting before my eyes, but she never once complained. Even on the hardest days, she found the strength to smile and ask me how my day was going. Raven called once a week, usually on her lunch break. Short conversations full of common phrases. She came twice more, at Christmas and in February when Iris was transferred to hospice care. Both times she looked uncomfortable, as if she didn't know what to say or how to act. Nat didn't come at all, citing work commitments. Iris died on a quiet spring morning. I was sitting next to her, holding her hand, when she simply stopped breathing. Her last words were, "I'm sorry, Raven Ezra, she just doesn't understand." The funeral was held in a small circle. A few colleagues from school, a couple of old friends, neighbors. Raven and Nat flew in the morning of the ceremony. She was pale but held herself aloof, as if she were attending the funeral of a distant relative, not her mother. Nat kept checking her cell phone. After everyone dispersed, Raven suddenly changed. She stayed for a week, taking care of the house, cooking, asking me how I was feeling. Nat flew out the next day, but she stayed. This change surprised me. Raven had never shown such concern in her entire adult life. "Daddy, have you thought about what you're going to do next?" she asked me on the third day when we were having dinner on the veranda. "I'm going to live as I've been living," I answered, surprised by the question. "Maybe I'll go back to my part-time job as a tutor. But this house, it's so big for one person. And the stairs, it's dangerous at your age." At my age, I grinned. Newton had already written elements and discovered the laws of motion. And I'm still perfectly capable of getting up to the second floor without shortness of breath. Raven didn't smile at my joke. "I'm serious, Dad. Nat and I were discussing. There's a great senior center in the Chicago suburbs. I could visit you every weekend." "Like you visited your mom?" It just slipped out. I regretted it when I saw the look on her face. "That's not fair," she said coldly. "I was busy working. We couldn't just drop everything and move to Coralville." "No one asked you to move. But your mother had been dying for 6 months, Raven. You saw her 3 times in that time." "I called every week, 10 minutes at a time between meetings." We stopped talking. Raven was fiddling with her napkin. I was watching the sunset. The first serious fight I'd had since Iris died. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I just want to take care of you. You're all alone and I'm worried." Her voice sounded sincere, but something in her eyes made me wary. It was the look I'd seen in her eyes when she was a kid, when she tried to convince me to buy her an expensive toy. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "This house is all I have left of my life with your mom." The next day, Raven offered to sort through Mom's stuff a little so it won't be so hard on you. I declined, saying I would do it myself when I was ready. She insisted, saying she could take a vacation and help me get the house in order. "The house is in perfect order," I objected. "Your mom always took care of it." "But a lot of things need fixing," Raven persisted. "The porch is wobbly, the wallpaper in the bedroom is faded, the kitchen looks like a museum piece from the 70s. Your mom and I used to love our kitchen." "But you're on your own now, Dad. Maybe it's time for a change. We could sell the house, the money could go to pay for a nice boarding house." That's when I felt something was wrong. Raven had never been interested in our house, calling it an old wreck. Now she was talking about selling with the insistence of a realtor who smelled a commission. In the days that followed, her concern became even more intrusive. She made an appointment for me to see a doctor for a complete checkup without asking my opinion. She brought brochures of various boarding houses, emphasizing those with full provision and medical care. Twice I heard her on the phone to Nat, lowering her voice and retreating into the garden, but individual phrases reached me. Stubborn. We'll have to wait. The lawyer said. When she was leaving, she hugged me tighter than usual and said, "Dad, please think about moving. It's dangerous to live alone at your age. What if you fall and can't call for help?" At my age, Einstein was still working on the unified field theory. I smiled. "Don't write me off prematurely, Raven. I'm just worried about you." Her eyes filled with tears. "After what happened to Mom." "Cancer has nothing to do with age or lifestyle," I cut her off. "It's just an unlucky lottery." She nodded, kissed me on the cheek, and left. I was left alone in an empty house, with a growing suspicion that my daughter's sudden concern was not about my health, but something else entirely. That night I dreamed of Iris. She was sitting in our garden among her favorite roses, reading a book. Looking up, she smiled at me and said, "Be careful, Ezra. Not everyone is as simple as they seem." When I woke up, I lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the creaks of the old house. What had Iris meant in my dream? And why was Raven suddenly so concerned about my well-being after so many years of indifference? The thought that flashed through my mind seemed so absurd that I laughed into the emptiness of the bedroom. Was my own daughter plotting something against me? That would be too much even for Raven, with her eternal lust for status and money. And yet, something about her behavior made me wary. Maybe I should pay more attention and try to figure out what was really going on. 2 weeks after Raven's departure, life settled into a new pattern. Empty, quiet, but still a rut. I woke up at 6 in the morning, a habit developed over 40 years of teaching, made coffee, read the newspaper, which was still delivered on Fridays, and gardened. Iris's roses required care, and I diligently followed all the instructions in her garden diary. In the evenings, I read or watched old movies, the ones we liked to watch together. Sometimes former colleagues dropped by. Sally Brooks, the chemistry teacher, brought home-baked goods and news from school. David Welch, history teacher and my chess partner, would drop by on Wednesdays for a game or two. Raven called every day, sometimes twice. These calls were alarmingly intrusive. She asked if I was taking my medication, if I was dizzy, if I remembered to eat. She asked if I needed help with cleaning or repairs. She offered to hire a caregiver. "Raven, I'm not an invalid," I countered. "I'm doing just fine on my own." "You didn't look good when I came here," she insisted. "Pale, thin. It's not surprising after all you've been through with Mom." "I'm fine. I've even started working out on the exercise bike." "That's dangerous at your age." She sounded genuinely terrified. "What if you have a heart attack? You're the only one in the house." These conversations wore me out. They made me feel not like a 67-year-old man of sound mind and good judgment, but like a decrepit old man on the threshold of the grave. One morning, while sorting through the mail, I found an envelope from the First National Coralville Bank. Inside was a letter addressed to Mrs. Iris Hollis. Apparently, the bank had not yet received notice of her death. I was about to file it away in my lawyer's file folder, but something compelled me to read it. "Dear Mrs. Hollis," the letter said, "congratulations on the successful completion of your investment term with our bank. As per your instructions, the sum of $1,200,000 has been transferred to your main account. Please contact your personal financial advisor to discuss further investment strategies." I reread the letter 3 times, unable to believe my eyes. $1,200,000? Iris? There must be some mistake. In our entire lives together, we'd barely scraped together a mortgage and a modest savings for retirement. Where could she have gotten that kind of money? Looking for answers, I headed for Iris's office, a small room on the 2nd floor where she prepared for classes and kept her books. I'd rarely gone in there since her death. It was too painful to see her things, to smell the light scent of her perfume that seemed to be permanently embedded in the walls. Iris's desk was as neat as ever. Folders with lesson plans, a stack of checked essays she hadn't had time to return to her students, a few books on literature, stationery in the top drawer, old photo albums in the bottom drawer. I was going through the papers, unsure of what I was looking for, when I came across a folder labeled Finance. Inside were bank statements, insurance policies, and a key. A key. A small silver one with a tag that read, Safety Deposit Box hash 3426, First National of Coralville. A safety deposit box? Iris's? The one she'd never told me about? The next morning, I went to the bank. The procedure was more complicated than I expected. I had to show Iris's death certificate, marriage certificate, and documents proving that I was her legal heir. Finally, the manager escorted me into the vault and left me alone with the safe deposit box. Inside were documents neatly organized into folders. I began to look through them, and with each page my amazement grew. Investment portfolios, company stocks, bonds, insurance policies. And everywhere there were 6 and 7 zeros. According to these documents, Iris had a fortune of over $10 million. Last in the pile was a folder labeled For Ezra. Inside, I found a letter written in familiar, neat handwriting. Dear Ezra, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer with you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm afraid you'll think I'm a fraud, and perhaps you're right. I got the money from my grandmother. She was the only daughter of an industrialist who made his fortune in the steel mills at the turn of the century. When her parents disowned her for marrying a mere teacher, see, it's a family trait, Grandma vowed that she would never depend on a man financially. She secretly invested a small inheritance from her aunt and made a decent fortune by the end of her life. As she was dying, she made me promise not to tell anyone about the money and to use it only when absolutely necessary. Money changes people, Iris, she said, and rarely for the better. I kept my promise. I didn't even tell you, though I've been on the verge of it many times, especially when I saw you taking extra hours to pay for Raven's college. Or when your back hurt so bad you couldn't get out of bed, but you went to work anyway. But then I watched our daughter change, becoming more and more obsessed with money and status. How she looks at our humble home with ill-concealed contempt. And I feared the knowledge of my grandmother's condition would finally destroy everything human in her. I left everything to you, Ezra, legally to our daughter, but with a condition I'm sure she can't fulfill. Raven is too much like her father, the father she never knew, my father. The same thirst for success at any cost, the same contempt for the weak. Forgive me if you can. And use that money the way your heart tells you to. Forever yours, Iris. I sat in the bank vault holding my wife's letter in my hands and felt reality slipping away from me. 42 years of marriage and such a secret? How could she keep it from me? And what did she mean by a condition Raven wouldn't be able to fulfill? The answer came 2 days later when I received a visit from Vernon Harris, Iris's family lawyer, whom I hadn't realized existed either. Mrs. Hollis made the will 6 months ago when she learned of her diagnosis, he informed me, sitting in my living room with a cup of tea. She had foreseen that her daughter might, shall we say, take an excessive interest in her inheritance. What do you mean by that? I frowned. Your wife left her entire fortune to her daughter, Harris continued, but on one condition. Raven must prove that she had visited her mother regularly in the last year of her life and had shown genuine concern. I grinned bitterly. She'd come 3 times in 6 months, and each time she'd run away at the first opportunity. Exactly. Mrs. Hollis kept a diary of all her daughter's visits. There are also hospice medical records that show all visitors. If Raven can't prove she cared, the estate goes to you, Mr. Hollis. And Raven knows about this condition? No, she only knows she's the primary heir. The full contents of the will be announced in 2 weeks' time in court. After the lawyer left, I sat in my chair for a long time trying to make sense of what I'd learned. Now Raven's strange behavior made sense. She'd somehow gotten wind of Iris's money and was now trying to manipulate me, perhaps hoping I'd give up my share of the inheritance in her favor. Or a chill ran down my spine as I realized what she was really going for. Nursing home, a nurse, constant questions about my health and memory. She was trying to paint me as incapacitated so she could gain control of any assets I might have. My hunch was confirmed the next day when Raven called again. "Dad, I talked to Dr. Stein," she began without preamble. "He recommends a full neurological workup. He says that after a major stressor, such as the death of a loved one, people your age often develop dementia?" I finished it for her. "You think I have dementia, Raven?" No, not at all," she said quickly. "It's just, you've become forgetful. Remember when I came to visit you couldn't find your glasses even though they were on the table?" "They weren't on the table, they were in my shirt pocket," I countered. "And I looked for them for about 5 seconds, no more." "See? You don't even remember that right." There was an ill-concealed triumph in her voice. "And the neighbor, Mrs. Finch, says she saw you leave the house in your pajamas in broad daylight." "I never leave the house in my pajamas," I said indignantly. "And by the way, Mrs. Finch moved to Arizona 2 years ago. A young couple with twins lives in her place now." There was a pause. "Well, maybe I got the last name wrong," Raven said, uncertainly. "Anyway, I've made an appointment for you to see a specialist next week. Nat and I will come and take you." "Don't bother," I replied coldly. "I feel fine, and I don't need a neurologist." "Dad, you just don't understand." "I understand everything, Raven, and I know about your mother's money." There was another pause, longer this time. Then she laughed, but it sounded strained. "What money are you talking about? Mom didn't have any money except her teacher's pension." "Really? What about the $10 million in investment accounts?" "What?" Her amazement sounded almost genuine. "Dad, there must be some mistake. Where would Mom get that kind of money?" "From her grandmother. And don't try to pretend you didn't know about it. Otherwise, what's all this comedy about my supposed incapacity?" "I'm not. We didn't." She hesitated, then changed tactics. "Dad, I think you're really out of your mind. What $10 million? That's absurd. Mom was a literature teacher, not a Rockefeller heiress." "In 2 weeks, the will be read out," I said. "Then everything will be clear." "Will?" Now there was genuine interest in her voice. "Mom left a will?" "Yes, and a very interesting one. I think it might clarify things." After I talked to Raven, I expected a lull, but instead it was a siege. Nat arrived the next day, ostensibly on a business trip. He was very nice. He brought a box of cakes from an expensive bakery, inquired about my health, offered to help me fix the porch. "Raven is very worried about you, Ezra," he said, sitting in my living room, "especially after that weird conversation yesterday. What was that story about Iris's millions?" "Not that weird," I replied, watching his reaction. "Your mother-in-law was richer than we all thought." "And you found out about it. How?" "From the letter she left me, and from the papers in the safety deposit box." Nat tensed, but quickly pulled himself together. "You know, Ezra," he said, leaning toward me after a great emotional upheaval, "people often think they've seen or heard something unusual. It's a normal mental reaction to stress." "You think I made up the safety deposit box and the letter from Iris?" I asked ironically. No, of course not." He raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "It's just that maybe you misinterpreted what you saw. Maybe it was about some other sums, or am I out of my mind and seeing millions where there aren't any?" I finished for him. Nat was embarrassed, but quickly found himself. "Raven mentioned that you've become a little distracted. That's perfectly normal in your—" "If you say at your age one more time, I might actually be acting a little inappropriately, I warned him. Now, if you don't mind, I have a game of chess with my neighbor. After Nat's visit, I started getting strange phone calls. Some Dr. Raymond claiming Raven had made an appointment for me. A social worker wondering if I was having trouble with my daily routine. Even a priest from the local church offering spiritual support in times of need. All of them, I realized, had been set up by Raven and Nat. Their goal was to gather evidence of my incapacity to present in court. I started keeping a diary, writing down every phone call, every strange occurrence, the date, the time, the names, the nature of the conversation. My intuition told me that these notes might come in handy. And then something happened that finally convinced me of the insidiousness of my daughter's plans. One evening, the doorbell rang with a young woman who identified herself as a social worker. "We've received a call that an elderly person at this address needs help," she said, standing at the door. "May I come in and see the living conditions?" "Who exactly gave the signal?" I asked. "That information is confidential," she replied, looking over my shoulder into the house. "But usually such calls come from concerned relatives or neighbors." I didn't let her enter, demanded to see my ID, which looked suspicious, and told her I would contact her superiors for verification. The woman quickly retreated. A call to the actual Social Security office confirmed my suspicions. No one had sent their staff to me. That same evening, Raven called. "Daddy, I just got a call from the social worker," she began with feigned concern. "She said you wouldn't let her in the house and you were being aggressive." "Yes, I kept out the woman with the fake ID you sent to spy on me," I said bluntly. "What?" Her outrage sounded almost convincing. "I didn't send anyone. Why do you say that?" "Because I checked. Social Security didn't send anyone to me, so either it was an imposter or you're lying to me right now." "Dad, you're getting paranoid. That's a very disturbing symptom. I think we should have a serious discussion about you trying to declare me incompetent so you can get your hands on your mother's inheritance," I interrupted her. "And you know what? Let's postpone this conversation until after the trial. There will be a lot of interesting revelations there." I hung up the phone, feeling my hands shaking not from fear, but from anger. How could my own daughter do this to me? Did money mean more to her than family? The next day I visited Vernon Harris and told him about all the strange events of the last few days. "They're trying to make it look like I'm losing my mind," I concluded. "Perhaps they plan to petition to have me declared incompetent before the reading of the will." Harris listened to me with a serious look, making notes in his notebook. "It's good that you kept a journal," he said, looking at my notes. "It'll be helpful if it comes to the competency proceedings. But I don't think they'll be able to do it before the probate. It usually takes several months." "What should I do now?" I asked. "Keep all the documents in a safe place," he advised. "Keep recording any strange occurrences. And most importantly, don't give in to provocation. They may try to record your inadequate conversation or provoke you to aggressive behavior in the presence of witnesses." I nodded, realizing that I had an uphill battle ahead of me. But now that I saw through Raven and Nat's plan, I was ready to fight back. For Iris's memory, for justice, for my own dignity. Walking home from the lawyer's office, I noticed a familiar car parked in front of my house. Raven and Nat had arrived unannounced. Well, let the decisive battle begin. I was ready. The day of the reading of the will was unusually gloomy for September. Heavy clouds hung over Coralville, promising rain, but not a drop of it came. The same heaviness hung over my soul as I tied my tie in front of the old mirror in my bedroom. In the 2 weeks since Raven and Nat's visit, I'd lived like I was under siege. My daughter and her husband had changed tactics. Instead of trying to make me look crazy, they were offering a compromise. "Dad, we've thought this through," Raven said, sitting in my living room during the last visit. "If Mom has really left such a condition, wouldn't it be better if we settle family style without courts and lawyers?" "What do you suggest?" I asked, keeping a neutral expression on my face. Well, let's say you get the house and enough money to live comfortably, and the rest? She made a vague gesture with her hand. The rest Nat and I could invest, grow it. It would be in your best interest. And if I refuse? Her face contorted for a moment, but she quickly pulled herself together. Then we'd have to go to court, and litigation could take years. In your... She paused, remembering my reaction to the phrase, "at your age." No one wants that in this situation, do they? True, I agreed. So let's just wait for the will to be announced. It's all spelled out. But Dad, Raven, I'm tired of being manipulated. First you try to prove I'm out of my mind. Now you're offering me a compromise without even knowing what the will says. Let's just wait till Thursday. She walked away unhappy, and Nat gave her a meaningful look as if to warn her of something. And so Thursday came. I put on my only decent suit, the one I'd bought for Iris's funeral, put on the tie she'd given me for our 30th anniversary, and went to the courthouse in downtown Coralville. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, just a few rows of benches, a judge's chair on a dais, and a table for the litigants. I was surprised to see not only Raven and Nat there, but also several of Iris's neighbors and former colleagues. It looked like news of the mysterious inheritance had already seeped into the town. Raven and Nat sat in the front row, both of them in expensive suits, as if they were attending a business meeting. They nodded at me and then turned away, whispering about something. I sat in the second row, feeling the gazes of curious townspeople at my back. At precisely 10 o'clock, Vernon Harris entered the room with an impressive folder of documents. He was followed by Judge Campbell, a gaunt man in his 60s with a neatly trimmed gray beard. "All rise, please," announced the clerk. "The Court of Coralville is hearing the probate of the will of Iris Elizabeth Hollis." We rose. I noticed Raven fidgeting with her jacket and Nat adjusting his tie. They looked tense, but confident. The judge took his seat and motioned for us to sit down. "Mr. Harris, are you representing the late Mrs. Hollis as her lawyer?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Harris replied. "I have a notarized will of Mrs. Hollis made 6 months ago when she was of sound mind and memory, which is confirmed by the medical report attached to the documents." "Proceed," the judge nodded. Harris opened the folder and took out several sheets of paper. "The will is in full form, in compliance with all legal norms. I'll read out the main points." He coughed and began. "I, Iris Elizabeth Hollis, being of sound mind and sound judgment, do hereby declare that this is my last will and testament and an expression of my will." I listened to the standard legal wording half-heartedly, watching Raven and Nat. They sat leaning forward with smug smiles on their faces. Raven even placed her hand on Nat's knee in a gesture of anticipation. "All of my estate, including real estate, bank accounts, investment portfolios, stocks, bonds, and other financial assets totaling approximately $10,700,000 at the time of this will, I bequeath to my only daughter, Raven Priscilla Prescott, née Hollis." A whisper of astonishment ran through the hall. 10 million! Such a sum was almost unfathomable to little Coralville. I saw the eyes of Sally Brooks, my former co-worker, sitting across the aisle from me. Raven and Nat exchanged triumphant glances. Nat even allowed a smug smirk to be thrown in my direction. I'd expected this. Iris had warned me in her letter that she was technically leaving everything to Raven, and yet hearing it out loud was painful. Not because of the money. God knows I've never been a wealthy man. But because of the fact that our daughter was so blatantly happy to receive the inheritance of her mother, whom she hadn't even bothered to properly care for in the last months of her life. I closed my eyes, preparing to accept defeat. Well then, so be it. Iris had made her choice, and I had to respect it, no matter how strange it seemed. But then Harris's voice changed, clearer, firmer. I opened my eyes and saw that the lawyer had turned the page and was now looking directly at Raven. "However," he continued, "the above inheritance is only possible if the following condition is met. Raven Priscilla Prescott must document that during the last year of my life, she visited me at least twice a month and showed genuine concern and participation in my fate." I froze. This was it, the condition Iris had spoken of in the letter, a condition that Raven could never fulfill. "In the event of failure to fulfill this condition," Harris continued, "my entire estate passes to my husband, Ezra James Hollis." Silence reigned in the hall. I shifted my gaze to Raven. The blood had drained from her face and her lips were white. She looked like she'd been kicked in the butt. Nat froze beside her, his smug smile turning into a grimace of disbelief. This is some kind of mistake," Raven finally said, rising. "I used to visit my mom regularly. I called her every week." "Let me finish, Mrs. Prescott," Harris said dryly. "The will states, to confirm that the condition has been fulfilled, I kept a diary to record all of my daughter's visits. This diary is kept in a blue box in my study. Records of visits to St. Mary's Hospice, where I spent the last 2 months of my life, can also be requested." Judge Campbell frowned and looked at Raven. "Mrs. Prescott, are you prepared to produce evidence that you visited your mother at least twice a month during the last year of her life?" Raven looked back at Nat confusedly, then turned back to the judge. Of course I visited my mom. Maybe not always twice a month. I had a demanding job in Chicago, and I couldn't get to Coralville that often, but I called all the time, inquiring about her health. Dad can attest to that." All eyes turned to me. I rose slowly. "Your Honor," I said, trying to speak evenly, "in the 6 months of my wife's illness, our daughter came 3 times. In all, she spent about 15 hours with her dying mother. As for the calls, they were indeed weekly, lasting an average of about 10 minutes. "That's not true," Raven exclaimed, her voice shaking with rage. "I called my mom much more often, and I tried to visit, but I had important work to do, projects that couldn't be put off." "I think we should familiarize ourselves with said diary," the judge said. "Mr. Harris, do you have it?" Harris nodded and took out a small blue box from his briefcase, the same one that always stood on Iris's desk. "I've seen her hundreds of times write something down in a notebook, which she then hid in this box. I never realized she kept a record of our daughter's visits." The judge accepted the box, opened it, and took out a thin, leather-bound notebook. He read in silence for a few minutes, turning the pages, then looked up at Raven. "According to these records, Mrs. Prescott, you visited your mother exactly 7 times during the last year of her life. 3 of those visits were in the first 6 months, when she was still unaware of her illness. After her diagnosis, you visited her on Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, February 14th, and the day she was transferred to hospice care. The total duration of all visits was approximately 26 hours. That was substantially less than the condition of the will required." Raven turned even paler. Nat put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. "This diary doesn't prove anything," she said, trying to keep her composure. "Mom could have gotten something mixed up. She was on strong painkillers that affected her perception of reality." "In that case," Harris intervened, "we can consult the medical records of St. Mary's Hospice. I have authorization to access that data." He pulled another folder from his briefcase and handed it to the judge. "This records all patient visits for the period in question. As you can see, Mrs. Prescott visited her mother at the hospice twice, on the day of the transfer and on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Both visits were brief, less than an hour." Raven jumped up, her face contorted with anger. "This is a conspiracy," she shouted. "Daddy turned Mommy against me. She always loved him more, always took his side." "Mrs. Prescott," the judge said sternly, "I ask you to remain calm. This is an official court hearing." "What calm?" Raven was almost screaming. "They're conspiring to disinherit me. Mom was sick. She didn't know what she was doing. And she pointed a trembling finger at me, he took advantage of her fortune. Your Honor, I said calmly, my wife made her will 6 months before she died when she was fully conscious. Her decision was thoughtful and deliberate. She wanted our daughter to show her at least a minimum of care and attention in the last months of her life. That wasn't much to ask for. It's manipulation, Raven persisted. Mom knew I wouldn't be able to come so often. I have work, commitments. She deliberately set an impossible condition. Twice a month is an impossible condition, I asked quietly. You live 3 hours away from here, Raven, not on the other side of the world. I have a career. Unlike you, she blurted out. You've spent your whole life living in this backwater on measly teacher salaries. And when I finally succeeded, you were jealous. Both of you. Nat tried to calm her down, but she pushed his hand away. Raven, sit down, he hissed through gritted teeth. You're only making things worse. But she was too furious to listen. I'm going to contest that will, she declared, turning to the judge. Mom was incompetent when she made it. Dad manipulated her. We have a medical report on Mrs. Hollis's condition at the time the will was made, Harris interjected. It's attached to the documents. The doctor confirms that she was of sound mind and understood the meaning of her actions. Judge Campbell, who had been listening attentively, raised his hand for silence. I think we should all calm down and get back to the facts, he said. According to the documents presented, Mrs. Hollis made a legally flawless will in her right mind. She set a clear condition of inheritance for her daughter, which the records show was not fulfilled. Thus, in accordance with the deceased's will, her estate passes to her spouse, Mr. Ezra Hollis. Raven staggered as if from a blow. Nat supported her by the elbow. No, she whispered. No, it's impossible. 10 million. It was going to change our lives. Mrs. Prescott, the judge continued, you have the right to contest the will, but I must warn you that without substantial evidence of your mother's incapacity or coercion, the chances of success are minimal. All the documents presented today confirm that Mrs. Hollis's will was clearly and unambiguously expressed. Raven collapsed on the bench, covering her face with her hands. Nat whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. I sat there, stunned by what was happening. Even though Harris had warned me about the contents of the will, seeing Raven's reaction was painful. Not because of her disappointment over the money, but because of the realization of how deep the gulf between us was. My daughter truly valued her mother's inheritance more than her memory of her. Unless the parties have other pleas, said the judge, I declare the will of Iris Elizabeth Hollis valid and enforceable. The entire estate of the deceased passes to her husband, Ezra James Hollis. This court is adjourned. He struck the gavel, and the sound seemed to break the stupor that had enveloped the hall. People began to talk, to rise from their seats, to cast curious glances at Raven and me. Harris came up to me and shook my hand. Congratulations, Mr. Hollis. If you have any questions about asset management, I'm at your service. I nodded, unable to utter a word. Everything that had happened seemed unreal, like a bad dream. Raven finally stood up. Her face was contorted with rage and resentment. This isn't over, she said, walking past me. I won't let you steal what is rightfully mine. Raven, I said quietly, it was never a matter of money. Your mother just wanted you to be there for her when she needed you. Hypocrite, she spat out. You two had always been hypocrites, pretending to be humble teachers while you hid millions. I didn't know anything about your mother's money until after she died, I replied. And she didn't hide millions. She just didn't consider wealth to be the most important thing in life. Unlike you. Raven made a sound like a growl and quickly headed for the exit. Nat, casting me a cold glance, followed her. I was left standing in the middle of the empty hall, feeling a strange emptiness inside. I should have felt joy, or at least relief, that justice had been done. But instead, I felt a deep sadness. My daughter, My only child had just shown her true face, and that face was distorted by greed and selfishness. "Mr. Hollis," Harris said quietly, standing beside me, "you need time to think things through. But when you're ready, we should discuss the disposition of the inheritance. There are some investments that need attention." "Yes, of course," I replied absent-mindedly. "Tomorrow or next week. Whatever suits you." He handed me a business card. "Call me when you're ready." I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight. The clouds had finally parted. In the parking lot, I saw Raven and Nat arguing fiercely over something in front of their car. She was waving her arms around. He was trying to calm her down. When they saw me, they both stopped talking, got in their car, and drove off without even saying goodbye. I walked slowly home, thinking about the vicissitudes of fate. A month ago, I was just an ordinary pensioner, a widower trying to come to terms with the loss of his beloved wife. Now I was suddenly a multi-millionaire with no family. Was that money worth the price? As I approached the house, I noticed a woman on the porch. She stepped up to meet me, and I recognized Sally Brooks, my former co-worker. "Ezra," she said, smiling awkwardly, "I wanted to make sure you were okay. It's been a tense meeting." "Thanks, Sally," I replied, unlocking the door. "Would you like to come in for tea?" We were sitting on the veranda where Iris liked to sit, watching her roses and drinking tea from her favorite set. "I never thought Iris was rich," Sally said, shaking her head. "She was always so, simple. No bragging, no expensive things." "I didn't know either," I admitted. "She'd kept that secret for 42 years. What are you going to do with all that money now?" I wondered. It had been on my mind for days. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I never aspired to be rich. I had enough of what I had with Iris: a house, a job we loved, a few good friends." "You could travel," Sally suggested. "See all the places you and Iris dreamed of." "Without her?" I shook my head. What would be the point? We were silent for a moment, looking at the roses swaying in the breeze. "You know, Sally," I said at last, "there's something wrong with the way things turned out. Iris didn't want the money to go to Raven because of her attitude, but I'm not sure she wanted it to go to me. Maybe she just didn't see any other way." "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I shrugged. "I just feel like I should do something with that money, something that would make sense to Iris." Sally finished her tea and set the cup on the table. "You've always been a good man, Ezra," she said, rising, "and Iris knew it. Whatever you decided, I'm sure she would have approved." After Sally left, I sat on the veranda for a long time, thinking about Iris's words from her letter. "Use that money as your heart tells you to." What was my heart telling me? I didn't know yet, but I was sure that the answer would come soon. In the meantime, I had to deal with the aftermath of today's meeting. Raven wasn't one to give up easily. Her words, "This isn't over," weren't an empty threat. I had to prepare for another battle. The morning after the reading of the will, the phone woke me up at 7 o'clock. It was Vernon Harris calling. "Good morning, Mr. Hollis," he said without preamble. "I'm sorry to call early, but we have a problem. Raven has hired an attorney, one Martin Sheldon, quite a well-known expert in Chicago on contesting wills." I sat up on the bed, trying to chase away the remnants of sleep. "What exactly does he intend to contest?" "Your wife's capacity at the time of the will. Sheldon's already requested all the medical records. He claims that Iris's heavy painkillers could have affected her judgment." "But we have a medical report on her condition," I objected. "Yes, and it's impeccable. But Sheldon's not the type to give up easily. He's known for his aggressive tactics. I'd like to meet with you today to discuss our strategy." 2 hours later, I was sitting in Harris's office, a small but neat space in the business district of Coralville. On the wall were law school diplomas and pictures of Harris with some important people in smart suits. "Here's a copy of Sheldon's request," Harris said, handing me a document. "As you can see, he's requesting not only Iris's medical records, but also the testimony of the hospice nursing staff, your financial records for the last 5 years, and even a psychological evaluation of Iris's diary. I ran my eyes over the long list of demands. Is this legal? Digging through our personal documents? In the context of a lawsuit, yes, if the judge approves the request. But most of these demands are redundant and clearly intended to wear us down and find some kind of lead. What do we do? Prepare for battle, Harris said simply. I've already filed a cross motion to dismiss most of the requests as irrelevant, but some documents will have to be produced. We spent several hours discussing defense strategy. Harris was confident that legally our position was flawless, but warned that Raven and her attorney might try to turn the case into an emotional one. They'll push the pity angle, making Raven out to be a loving daughter who couldn't visit her mother often because of her job, he explained. They might even insinuate that you were turning your wife against your daughter. But that's absurd, I was indignant. I always defended Raven to Iris when she was upset about her infrequent visits. I know, Harris nodded, and we'll prove it. We have Iris's diary, medical records, and most importantly, witnesses, hospice staff who saw how infrequent Raven's visits were. When I got home, the answering machine revealed a message from Raven. Dad, her voice sounded cold and official, I hope you realize that I can't leave things the way they are. It's not fair. You knew about Mom's money and turned her against me. I'm offering you a compromise, 50-50. Think carefully before you say no. Martin Sheldon is the best in the business, and he's willing to turn over every stone in your and Mom's past. Think about whether you need this at your age. Threats. Now she'd moved on to open threats. I erased the message, feeling the anger boiling up inside. Not so much about the money, I still didn't know what to do with it, but about how low my daughter had fallen. The first hearing on Raven's lawsuit was scheduled for a week later. In that time, Harris had assembled an impressive dossier refuting every possible accusation. Doctor's testimony confirming Iris's mental clarity at the time of the will. Phone records showing that Raven's calls were indeed brief and formal. Testimony from hospice nurses about how Iris often asked about her daughter and became upset when she did not visit. On the day of the hearing, the Coralville courthouse was packed. The news of the $10 million inheritance of a humble literature teacher and the scandal surrounding it spread through the town with the speed of a forest fire. A reporter from the local paper even tried to interview me as I entered the building. Inside, Raven and Nat were already waiting, both in expensive suits and stone-faced. Sitting next to them was Martin Sheldon, a tall, lean man with sharp features and cold eyes. He looked like a bird of prey ready to pounce on its prey. Judge Campbell entered at 10 o'clock sharp. After the formalities, Sheldon took the stand. Your Honor, he began, rising from his seat, my client, Mrs. Raven Prescott, considers the will of her mother, Iris Hollis, invalid for 2 reasons. First, Mrs. Hollis was under the influence of pain medication, which may have affected her judgment. Second, there was strong reason to believe that her husband, Ezra Hollis, had pressured and manipulated her into including an impossible condition for her daughter in the will. I felt the blood rush to my face with indignation. Harris put his hand on my shoulder reassuringly. Mrs. Prescott is a busy businesswoman, Sheldon continued, who couldn't quit her job and move to Coralville to care for her mother. She did the best she could within her circumstances, calling, visiting when she could. The stipulation of 2 visits a month was unrealistic and had been included in the will for the sole purpose of disinheriting her daughter. When Sheldon had finished, Harris took the floor. He methodically refuted all the charges, presented the report of Iris's attending physician, confirming her clear mind at the time of the will's preparation, and emphasized that I had not even known of the existence of the will until after my wife's death. Harris then pulled Iris's diary from her briefcase and read several passages where she explained her motivations for including the condition in the will. She hoped that Raven would care more if she knew that the inheritance depended on it. Sheldon tried to challenge the authenticity of the diary, but was unsuccessful. Harris presented a graphologist's report confirming that all the entries were in Iris's hand. After that, the testimony began. I told about our relationship with Iris, about how rarely Raven visited her mother during her illness, about how I learned about my wife's condition only after her death. Sheldon attempted to confront me about the contradictions, insinuating that I might have known about the money in advance and manipulated Iris, but his attempts were unsuccessful. I was followed by Dr. Ellen Reed, who confirmed Iris's clarity of mind at the time of the will, a hospice nurse who described Raven's infrequent visits, and Vernon Harris himself, who described the process of making the will. The final witness was Raven. She tried to project the image of a loving daughter who could not visit her mother often because of her important work, claimed that I had always been against her career and may have turned Iris against her. Harris shattered this image by presenting phone records showing that in the 6 months of her mother's illness, Raven had called her only 23 times, totaling less than 3 hours. He also called witnesses attesting that I had always been proud of my daughter's accomplishments and had never opposed her career. After a recess, Judge Campbell announced his decision. Having considered all the evidence presented, I find that the will of Iris Elizabeth Hollis is valid and enforceable. There is no reason to believe that Mrs. Hollis was incapacitated at the time of making the will or was under any duress. The condition of 2 visits per month was a reasonable requirement from mother to daughter, and Mrs. Prescott's failure to comply with this condition has legal consequences, namely the transfer of the estate to the decedent's spouse, Mr. Ezra Hollis. Mrs. Prescott's suit to contest the will is dismissed. Raven jumped up from her seat, her face contorted with rage. "That's not fair. He doesn't deserve that money. He didn't even know about it." "Mrs. Prescott," the judge said sternly, "I ask you to keep order in the courtroom." "What order?" she almost shouted. "My father's been swindled out of $10 million and you talk about order?" Nat tried to calm her down, but she pushed his hand away. "Raven," I said as I approached her, "it was never about the money. Your mother just wanted you to be there for her in her last days. Don't you dare talk about her," Raven blurted out. "You've been manipulating her all her life. A humble physics teacher, a devoted husband, and the truth is, you were just waiting to get your hands on her money." "You know that's not true," I said quietly. "I only know that you stole my inheritance," she turned to the judge. "I will appeal. I'll go all the way to the Supreme Court if I have to." "That's your right," Judge Campbell replied calmly. "In the meantime, I declare this court adjourned." Harris and I walked out of the courtroom surrounded by reporters and curious citizens. Raven and Nat stayed inside, apparently discussing with Sheldon what to do next. "Congratulations," Harris said, shaking my hand. "Justice had been served." "Yes," I replied without much joy. "But at what cost? I lost my daughter." "You didn't lose her today, Mr. Hollis," Harris said softly. "I'm afraid you lost her much earlier, when she decided that money and status were more important than family." I nodded, realizing he was right. Raven had made her choice long ago, long before Iris's illness and the will. Today's proceedings had simply made that choice obvious to everyone. When I went outside, it started to rain, the first rain in weeks. I stood under the courthouse canopy, watching the drops drumming on the asphalt, and thought about the strange irony of life. All my life, Iris and I had lived modestly, making every dollar count, and now I was suddenly richer than I'd ever dreamed. But what good is money if there's no family to share it with? The door behind me opened and Raven and Nat came out onto the porch. When she saw me, she froze for a moment, then walked past me without even glancing in my direction. Nat followed her, giving me a cold stare. "Raven," I called out, "we can still talk. This whole thing can be resolved in other ways." She turned around and I saw such hatred in her eyes that I stepped back. "There's nothing more to discuss between us," she said. "You chose money over family. Enjoy your millions while you can." "I didn't choose money," I countered. "Your mother just wanted—" "Don't you dare speak for her," Raven interrupted. "You don't know what she wanted. You didn't even know about her money." She turned and walked to the car, Nat following her like a shadow. I watched them go, feeling deeply sad and devastated. Winning the trial brought me no joy, only the realization of how irrevocably I had lost my daughter. A month had passed since the trial. Autumn had taken hold, turning the leaves of the maples on my street bright red. Iris had always loved this time of year, the golden light, the cool air, the smell of fallen leaves. She said that fall reminded her of the importance of change, that everything is transient and therefore valuable. Change. More has happened in my life than I could have ever imagined. Vernon Harris organized the transfer of the inheritance, a process that was more complicated than I expected. Dozens of documents to sign, several meetings with financial advisors explaining the structure of Iris's investments, visits to banks to open new accounts. The amount she had accumulated was staggering, $10,732,000. I, who had never had more than a couple $1,000s in my account, was now a multimillionaire. It's absurd. Raven, as promised, filed an appeal, but the higher court refused to consider it, citing the lack of new circumstances. After that, I didn't hear from my daughter for almost 3 weeks. Meanwhile, I pondered what to do with the unexpected wealth. My first impulse was to give everything to charity, just to get rid of the money that fell on me like snow on my head. But that would be disrespectful to Iris's memory. She obviously wanted me to use it wisely. Maybe buy a new house. But I loved our old house on Chestnut Street, every creak in it, every crack in the walls. Maybe travel. But what's the point of traveling alone? Iris dreamed of seeing Venice, Paris, Kyoto. Without her, those places lost their appeal to me. The solution came unexpectedly when I was sorting through the books in Iris's study. On the shelf was a folder labeled Project. Inside, I found the outline of an idea for an educational foundation for gifted children from low-income families. Iris had detailed the concept: college scholarships, grants for research projects, summer schools to develop talent. So many capable children are lost to science and the arts simply because their parents don't have the money for a decent education, she wrote. If I had the opportunity, I would create a foundation that would give such children a chance. Not just money, but real support, mentors, access to resources, psychological help. Some kind of support that would help them move from their world of limited opportunities to a world of limitless prospects. As I sat on the floor of her office holding these notes in my hands, I suddenly realized I had found the answer. This is what is to be my legacy, Iris's and my legacy, a foundation in her name that would fulfill her dream. The next day, I called Harris and outlined my idea. He approved of the plan and offered to introduce me to a lawyer specializing in nonprofits. The wheel of new meetings, consultations, and documents spun. I decided to keep $500,000, more than enough for a comfortable old age in Coralville. The rest of the money was to go to the Iris Hollis Foundation for Gifted Children. In the midst of these preparations came a call from Raven. Her voice sounded softer than the last time I saw her. "Daddy, how are you?" she asked, almost caringly. "Not bad, thanks," I replied, surprised by her tone. "And you?" "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she said after a pause. "Maybe I really didn't pay enough attention to my mom during her illness. Work, stress. But I loved her, I really did." I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Was she truly remorseful? "Dad, I'd like to meet," Raven continued. "To talk quietly without lawyers and judges. Maybe there's some way we could, make things right?" Something in her voice made me wary. Too abrupt a change after weeks of angry accusations. "Sure," I agreed cautiously. "When do you want to come over?" Nat and I could come this weekend if that's convenient for you. Okay, I'll be waiting. After talking to Raven, I called Harris and told him about my upcoming visit. He, too, expressed doubts about my daughter's sincerity. "Be careful, Mr. Hollis," he advised. "Don't sign any documents she may bring, and if possible, record your conversation, just in case." Saturday morning, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Through the living room window, I saw Raven and Nat get out of the expensive SUV. They both looked impeccable, expensive clothes, confident movements. But there was something about their appearance that seemed taut, like they were preparing for a big performance. Raven hugged me on the doorstep, the first time she'd hugged me in a long time. Her perfume was too strong, the hug too tight for the man who'd recently accused me of stealing my inheritance. "Daddy, you've lost weight," she said with ostentatious concern. "Are you eating well?" "Quite well," I replied as I led them into the living room. Sally Brooks brings me home baking once a week, and the rest of the time I'm quite capable of making my own lunch. We sat down at the table where I had already prepared tea and cookies. Raven looked around the room as if assessing what had changed since her last visit. Nat looked tense but tried to smile. "So," I began after exchanging pleasantries, "you wanted to talk?" Raven took a deep breath. "Yes, Dad. Nat and I have been thinking a lot about what happened, and we've come to the conclusion that this feud is pointless. We are family, after all. Mom wouldn't want us fighting over money." "I agree," I nodded. "Iris would be upset." "Exactly." Raven perked up. "Mom always valued family ties, and I was thinking maybe we could find a compromise, something that would suit us both." "What kind of compromise are you suggesting?" She hesitated for a moment, then continued. "Well, for example, we could manage the inheritance together. We could set up a family trust or an investment company. You'd get a steady income for the rest of your life, and Nat and I would manage the assets. Nat has a lot of experience in investments, and he could make a lot of money." Nat nodded enthusiastically. "I have several promising projects in mind. With that kind of startup capital, we could triple the amount in 5 to 7 years." I looked at them carefully, trying to see if they really believed that I would agree to such a proposal. Give them control of the money in exchange for a steady income, after everything that had happened? "Sounds interesting," I said in a neutral tone. "What would the trust look like legally? Who would be the main beneficiary?" "Well, technically it would be you," Raven answered quickly. "But Nat and I would be the trustees. It's standard practice when the beneficiary is old and inexperienced in managing such sums." "I see." I sipped my tea. "And how much would this steady income be?" They looked at each other. "We thought about $10,000 a month," Nat suggested. "That would be more than enough to live comfortably in Coralville." I nodded, as if considering the offer. "What about the terms of the contract? Can I revoke my power of attorney at any time?" "Well, not exactly," Nat said cautiously. "Effective asset management requires stability and a long-term perspective. We would suggest a minimum 10-year agreement with no possibility of early termination except in the case of gross breach of terms." 10 years, I repeated. "That's a long time for someone my age, don't you think?" Raven cringed slightly at my comment, but quickly pulled herself together. "Dad, we only want what's best for you and Mom's inheritance. Think about it. What are you going to do with all that money? You've lived modestly all your life. You have no experience managing large sums of money. Nat and I are financial professionals. And that's why I have to give you control of the entire inheritance?" I asked you bluntly. "Not give it to you, but entrust it to you," Raven corrected with a hint of irritation in her voice. "Those are completely different things." I gave her a long look, then shifted my gaze to Nat. They both looked tense, like actors who'd forgotten their lines. "You know, Raven," I said finally, "I've already decided what I'm going to do with the money." "Have you?" There was a flicker of interest in her eyes. "How?" I'm setting up an educational fund in your mother's name for gifted children from low-income families. There was a pause. Raven looked like she didn't hear what I was saying. An educational fund? She asked. You're going to give all the money to charity? Almost all of it, I nodded. I'm going to keep $500,000 for a peaceful old age, and the rest will go to the foundation. Nat made a squeezing sound. Raven turned pale. You can't do that, she said, and there was no longer any pretense of concern in her voice. It's Mom's money. It has to stay in the family. I'm fulfilling your mother's wish, I objected. Among her papers, I found a detailed plan for such a fund. It was her dream to help talented children get an education that would otherwise be out of their reach. This is a mistake. Raven shook her head. Mom never talked about such a foundation. That's because you've barely talked to her in recent years, I said softly, especially about things that were really important to her. Raven stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her cup. You can't just give away our family money. It's irresponsible. It's insane. The money belongs to me by court order, I reminded him, and I will dispose of it as I see fit. We'll overturn that ruling, Nat intervened. We can sue to have you declared incompetent if you're going to commit such recklessness. I smiled, but there was no mirth in my smile. You already tried that, remember? It didn't work. And believe me, any judge would rather find a man incompetent who comes to make peace with his father just to get control of his money. Raven froze as if she'd been struck. Then her face contorted with anger. You set this whole thing up on purpose. You lured us here to humiliate us. I didn't lure anyone, I said calmly. You're the one who called me with the fix-it offer. I just wanted to hear what you had to say. And I did. What did you hear? She asked me defiantly. That you're still only interested in money, I replied. Not a word of regret for the way you treated my mother in her last months. Not a single question about how I was coping with her loss. Just an offer to manage the assets in exchange for a handout. Nat put a hand on Raven's shoulder as if to keep her from harsh words or actions. I think we'd better leave, he said coldly. Obviously, reasonable conversation is impossible here. I agree, I nodded. But before you go, there's something else I want to say. Raven, your mother loved you until her last breath. Even when you ignored her calls, even when you canceled visits for work meetings. She always believed that somewhere deep down inside you were still the girl she knew, kind, compassionate, caring. She created this condition in her will not to punish you, but to give you a chance to show the best version of yourself. Unfortunately, you didn't take that chance. Raven looked at me with wide-open eyes. For a moment, I thought my words had touched something in her soul. But then she turned away. Come on, Nat, she said. There's nothing more to do here. They left, slamming the door. I watched out the window as their car drove out of the yard, and I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness at the realization that my daughter was finally lost to me, and relief that now I knew exactly the right thing to do. The next few months passed in the hassle of setting up the foundation. I hired an experienced team, lawyers, financial advisors, educators, who helped me complete all the paperwork and develop support programs. The foundation's office was housed in a small building in downtown Coralville that I had purchased specifically for this purpose. By spring, the Iris Hollis Educational Foundation was officially incorporated and operational. The first scholarship recipients were 5 local high school graduates, talented kids from low-income families who dreamed of college but couldn't afford it. I never heard from Raven again. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that she and Nat had moved to California, where he had gotten a job with some technology company. She seemed to have completely cut me out of her life, and though it hurt, I realized that it couldn't have been otherwise. We were 2 different people, 2 different in our values. One spring day, I sat in the garden watching Iris's roses bloom. They were always the first to bloom in our neighborhood, bright red like drops of blood on the green of the garden. Nearby on the table was a letter from one of the foundation's scholarship recipients, a girl named Lily, thanking her for the opportunity to attend medical school. "Thanks to your support, I will be able to become a doctor and help people," she wrote. "I promise that I will justify your trust, and in the future I will also help those who need support, just as you once helped me." I folded the letter and looked up at the sky. It was surprisingly clear blue, with a few puffy clouds floating somewhere to the east. "You were right, Iris," I said aloud. "As right as ever. Real wealth isn't about money." I thought the slight breeze that swayed the roses was her answer. She always saw through people, me, Raven, her students. She saw their true selves, hidden behind masks and ostentatious politeness. And she always believed in the best in people, even when reality said otherwise. Maybe that was the main lesson she wanted to teach me, to see people for who they are, but not to lose faith in what they can become. Accept reality, but don't forget the possibilities. I ran my hand along the rough stem of the rose. The prickles lightly scratched my skin, a reminder that even the most beautiful things in this world are not without sharp edges, like people, and so is life. There was the sound of a car pulling up behind me. I turned around and saw a school bus pull up in front of the house. A group of children, accompanied by a young woman, Emma Chang, the new director of the foundation, poured out of the bus. We had agreed that she would bring the new scholarship candidates to me today, the gifted students from Coralville Elementary. I rose from the bench, preparing to greet my guests. Life went on, and though it didn't have Iris and Raven in it, it had new people, new hopes, new possibilities. I knew Iris would approve. After all, she'd always said that true wealth wasn't about money, but about being honest with yourself. And now, for the first time in a long time, I felt truly rich.